questions. Question orale. The honourable member for Calgary, Forest Lawn.
Mr. Speaker, enormous deficit spending by this Prime Minister caused the Bank of Canada to hike its interest rates for the 7th consecutive time this year. An average mortgage will cost Canadians an extra $7,000 in interest payments alone. This Prime Minister's reckless spending has already driven up the costs on gas and groceries, and his failed energy policies will make home heating costs double. He'll further pile-drive Canadians financially when his failed carbon tax increases this year. Why won't the Prime Minister stop his wasteful inflationary spending, axe the failed carbon tax so Canadians can keep the heat on this winter and food on the table?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives are nothing if not at least consistent. They continue to ask us to stop being there to support Canadians. They oppose the child care agreements that we signed with the provinces, child care agreements that we're enshrining into law with legislation we're bringing in today. They oppose the dental support for low-income Canadians to make sure that kids have the best start in life possible. They oppose the rental supports that we move forward to deliver for Canadians. They stood against the kinds of supports we were flowing to Canadians through the dark times of the pandemic. We will continue to be there for Canadians and remain fiscally responsible, because that's what Canadians expect.
Well, member for Calgary, Forest Lawn.
Mr. Speaker, it's easier for this Prime Minister to sit in his ivory tower and blame everyone else and spend even more of Canadians' money to cover his own inflationary mess. His inflation tax is going to cost Canadians an extra $3,500, according to the Governor of the Bank of Canada. He is the architect of sending 1.5 million Canadians into a food bank, 500,000 of which were children. He's responsible for 1 in 5 Canadians skipping meals. He keeps failing, and Canadians continue to be on the hook for it. When will he understand Canadians can't afford any more of his failures and just want to eat and heat their homes?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, the Conservatives say they stand with Canadians, and then they stand in opposition to measures that ensure that Canadians can send their kids to the dentist. Then they stand in opposition to measures that will give families who pay a large amount of their low incomes on rent to get an extra bit of help. Then they stand against and continue to stand against child care fees that have been cut in half across the country, that is not only giving opportunities for kids to get the best start in life, not only supporting parents when the cost of living and payments are so high, but at the same time ensuring that our economy grows as people participate fully in our growth.
Hear, hear.
Member for Kelowna Lake Country.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister continues to keep his head in the sand when it comes to people's home heating bills. You know, someone from my community reached out to me recently saying that they had to make the tough decision whether to pay for their Fortis home heating bill or to buy groceries. Wow. He chose to heat his home even though the bill went from $46 a month to $163 a month. And he said that now he has to go to a food bank just to feed himself. The same food bank that he used to donate to. So why is the Prime Minister tripling down on increasing carbon taxes for everyday Canadians who can't even heat their homes now?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I've heard from Canadians right across the country that they are facing difficult times. We know how important it is to be there for Canadians, which is exactly what we are doing as a government, despite Conservative politicians opposing that. We're there with dental supports. We're there with rental supports. We're there with cutting childcare fees in half. I was just in the Honourable Member's province a few days ago to make an announcement on the fact that childcare fees have been cut in half, saving families hundreds, even thousands of dollars a month. We will continue to stand with Canadians despite Conservative opposition.
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Member for Chicoutimi-Le-Fior. Mr. Speaker, Canadians woke up yesterday morning with news that borders on nightmarish. The Bank of Canada announced an interest rate increase, the 7th of the year, thanks to the Liberals and their inflationary spending. For a family with an average mortgage, that's $7,000 more in interest per year, and their house isn't even heated yet. We know that the carbon tax applies to home heating. Will the Prime Minister cancel this tax so that Canadians don't get cold in their own homes this winter? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we are all concerned about the rising cost of living for Canadians. But on this side of the chamber, we are delivering assistance to Canadians. The Conservatives can continue to oppose it. We have come forth with dental supports, rental supports. We are providing more affordable daycare spaces across the country. We will continue to be there for people, despite the fact that the Conservative Party continues to vote against all of our measures to help people. The Honourable Member for Chicoutimi-Lafiore. It's quite ironic that Liberals say they understand the misery of Canadians when they allow themselves to give $32 billion in benefits to dead people and prisoners. What we should understand is that in Canada, we face winter temperatures that can drop to -45. Record cold temperatures are expected. It's not a luxury to keep warm in Canada in the winter. Can the Prime Minister make a commitment to do the only honourable thing he can and cancel his carbon tax so that Canadians can heat their homes?
Le très honorable Premier Ministre.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, it's incredible to see Conservatives attack the assistance that we give Canadians. He just made fun of the emergency benefit we provided during the pandemic. It provided direct assistance to Canadians, to businesses, to Quebecers, to Canadians across the country. It was essential not only to make it through the pandemic, but also to ensure that our economy would rebound quickly. We were there for Canadians despite the position of the Conservatives and will continue to be there to support people. The Honourable Member for La Prairie. In the government's contract with Sinclair Technologies, which is partly owned by Chinese interests accused of espionage, is a very concerning example. We know that the government is cancelling it, but the government awarded a contract to a company owned by a Chinese government, providing them with access to the RCMP secret frequencies. It's a filtering system that ensures the confidentiality of communications of the Prime Minister and foreign heads of state visiting Canada, and no one thought it was necessary to do any security checks. How can the Prime Minister explain that? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we are always watching out for hostile actors. We are very concerned by this contract with Sinclair Technologies, and the government will be taking all the necessary steps to ensure the integrity of national security and to put in place measures to ensure that nothing happens like this again in the future. The Honourable Member for La Prairie. Well, with respect to measures, the government has a Crown corporation whose mandate is to monitor telecommunications security, the CSE, the Communications Security Establishment. But imagine this, no one saw fit to call upon the expertise of the CSE to assess the national security risks associated with the contract that gives access to RCMP's secret frequencies to a company accused of spying in the U.S. Mr. Speaker, no one in the government thought it was necessary to ask the CSE to do an investigation. How can he explain that? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, as I said yesterday, we're very concerned by the situation, and that is why we asked the minister and officials to follow up on two aspects. First of all, what we have to do to ensure the integrity of our secure communications network now, and how can we improve the situation, the system rather, so that no problems like this recur in the future. The Honourable Member for Rosemont-la-Petite-Patrie. While sick children suffer and our pediatric hospitals are overflowing, the Prime Minister is simply trying to fade away into the background. Worried parents are filling waiting rooms with their little ones, and the Prime Minister isn't there. We're looking for him everywhere. This isn't time to play Where's Waldo? At Saint-Justine Hospital in Montreal, at the Centre Mère Hospital in Quebec City, the crisis is unprecedented. Our public health care system needs help. There's nothing more frightening for a parent than to have a sick child. Why is the health of our children not the priority of this Prime Minister?
Le très honorable Premier Ministre.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, as a parent, I fully understand the concerns of families with respect to pediatric care. We are determined to ensure that all families have access to essential services and medication their children need. We will continue to work hand in hand with the provinces and territories to improve healthcare services and to achieve results for Canadians. People know that we need to see improvements in our healthcare systems, and the federal government will be there to ensure that the provinces deliver the results for families and children.
Member for Vancouver Kingsway.
Well, the federal government is not present. That's the problem, Mr. Speaker. Ontario hospitals are so overwhelmed with sick kids that they're calling in the Red Cross. Staff at the Alberta Children's Hospital are worried a child might die waiting for care because they're overrun with patients. Across Canada, the situation is dire and parents are horrified. But Liberals are missing in action and Conservative premiers are moving to privatize healthcare. Canadians expect leadership from their Prime Minister in a time of crisis. When will he call an urgent meeting with the premiers so that our children get the care they need and deserve?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we will always defend our public health care system. We believe that all you should need to get health care in Canada is a health card, not a credit card. That's why we're making sure that in our discussions with the provinces, as we floor more money than ever before into the health care systems, we're asking for better outcomes. We're asking for concrete results. We're making sure that Canadians get the health care they need. We know the system is failing far too many Canadians right across the country. We will be there to ensure there are significant improvements.
The Honourable Member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
These Liberals have taken wasteful spending to the next level, whether it's tens of billions of dollars in wasteful COVID benefits, $54 million on the Arrive scam, or $6,000 a night in a luxury hotel room for this Prime Minister. These Liberals have no problem reaching into the pockets of Canadians, taking their money and throwing it on the inflationary fire that they lit. Life has become unaffordable under the mismanagement of these Liberals. So will they stop their wasteful inflationary spending so that Canadians don't have to decide whether to feed their families or to heat their homes?
The Honourable Minister of Employment.
I don't think the 13 million Canadians who got individual COVID benefits would agree that that was wasteful spending. We were there for them from the beginning when they needed it, and the Auditor General agreed. She said that we were able to get money into the hands of Canadians quickly, that money was well spent and helped people stay home safely, and that it avoided significant economic and social consequences.
Well, Member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
They absolutely got tens of billions of dollars into the hands of prisoners and deceased very quickly, and that is wasted money, and it's money that these Liberals need to be accounted, they need to account for. At the same time, we've heard from Ipsos polling this week that the majority of Canadians are scared they won't be able to put enough food on the table or gas in the car to get to work. 4 in 10 Canadians are worried that they're going to lose their jobs and they're in an economy under these Liberals. They've created a Canada where Canadians are afraid every day. Will they end their wasteful spending so Canadians can feed their families and heat their homes?
The Honourable Minister for Families.
Mr. Speaker, we've created and are creating a Canada where Canadians are there for each other, where the government is there for them in their times of need. At the height of the pandemic, 9 million Canadians accessed CERB, Mr. Speaker. We will not apologize for being there for Canadians when they needed us. We start from a place of compassion, from a place of trust. That doesn't mean there aren't controls in place, but unlike the Conservatives, we trust Canadians and we're going to be there for them when they need it.
The Honourable Member for Peterborough, Kawartha.
$54 million on an Arrive scam app, and the Liberals don't know who got rich. $4.5 billion to cut homelessness by 50%, and yet tent cities continue to increase across this country. And the latest, Mr. Speaker, $4.6 billion went to COVID relief to people who didn't even qualify. Wow. Mr. Speaker, the Liberals continue to spend billions and billions of Canadians' taxpayers' money. So how do they have the audacity to expect them to pay for their incompetence?
The Honourable Minister of Immigration.
How
ironic is it that the Conservative Party of Canada's strategy to combat an affordability crisis is to do less for Canadians in their time of need? It comes as no surprise to me because from the beginning of the campaign, the pandemic, their leader started with a press conference saying that these big fat government programs would not receive the support of the Conservative Party. Mr. Speaker, those programs kept food on the table for my neighbours and a roof over the heads of their children. Those programs kept open the doors of small businesses in my community, and the owners were able to keep the lights on. Those programs kept workers on payroll that allowed them to be able to afford the cost of living and at the same time maintain the benefits that their employer provided for them. I regret none of these programs. We would do it again because it was the right thing to do then. It's the right thing to do now.
Honourable member for Peterborough, Kawartha.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberals' inability to listen is inconceivable. We are not saying that that didn't help people. They are not accounting for nearly $30 billion that the Auditor General is calling for them to investigate. Who are they listening to? 1.5 billion people used a food bank. Children are starving. People are dying by suicide. We are not saying that. When will they listen? Have some humble pie and quit their inflationary spending.
The Honourable Minister. The Conservatives in the report by the Auditor General, she specified that our programs that were put in place helped save lives and jobs, Mr. Speaker. We were courageous and we looked after our economy. There are a lot of people on the ground who I've met with, and what do people tell me? They say they are happy that the Liberals are in power and have been since the start of the pandemic. It would have been a disaster for them if the Conservatives had been in charge. We will continue to look after our people.
For Chilliwack Hope.
It cost Canadian families a record amount to feed themselves in the last year, and unfortunately, it's only going to get worse. A new report confirms that it will cost over $1,000 more for Canadian families to put groceries on the table this year, driving their food costs to over $16,000 per year. Canadians who used to donate to the food bank are now lining up to use the food bank. So why don't the Liberals put an end to their inflationary policies, stop driving up the cost of everything so that Canadians can afford to feed their families again?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Tourism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And it is because of the actions of this government and the measures that we have put in place that 2 million fewer Canadians are living in poverty today, Mr. Speaker. In just a few days' time, Canadians will be able to apply for a new rental benefit. This is a direct payment that will help Canadians make ends meet, and this is targeted spending in order to help vulnerable Canadians. Experts have all agreed that this is not inflationary spending. This is being there for Canadians, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Chilliwack Hope.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberal program and plan is a total and complete failure. Food inflation is at a 40-year high. 1 in 5 Canadians are skipping meals to try to make ends meet. 1.5 million Canadians used the food bank in 1 month alone. 500,000 of them were children. Canadians cannot afford these Liberal inflationary policies. They can't afford to feed their families. So why don't they stop with the inflationary spending, stop making everything more expensive, and let Canadians get back to providing for their families?
The Honourable Minister.
You know what Canadians can't afford, Mr. Speaker, is bad financial advice from the Conservatives opposite. If Canadians had taken their advice and invested in crypto, they would have seen their savings wiped out. But instead, on this side of the House, we've actually been there to support Canadians. The Canada Child Benefit, which has lifted over 450,000 children out of poverty since 2015. 2 million fewer Canadians living in poverty thanks to the investments that this government has made in Canadians. Mr. Speaker, we trust Canadians, we believe in Canadians, and we're going to keep investing in them. I just wish the members opposite would do the same. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Le député de Mirabel.
The Honourable Member for Mirabel. Mr. Speaker, the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has urged banks to do their part in the fight against climate change. He asked them to come up with a verifiable plan for rapid transition to renewable energy. But in the meanwhile, Canada's big banks are among the world's top 20 backers of fossil fuels. Much of the money for oil comes from Canadian banks. Will the government put in place measures to encourage banks, our banks, to move towards clean energy?
L'honorable secrétaire
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Speaker, I want to take this opportunity to highlight the work that we do for the environment. We said that we would stop putting money into fossil fuels, and we're doing the work now to protect our waters, our land, and we're doing that now. We're talking about it here in Montreal. We're talking about it with the international community. Everyone has come to see what we're doing, and we're proud of the work that we're doing to protect the environment. The honourable member for Mirabel. Mr. Speaker, we know that the government's funding the oil sector, but the Canadian banking sector is as well. In the past 2 years, RBC's oil investments went from 19 to 39 billion. That's a heck of a lot of money. It's more than doubled over the past 2 years. If we had a government that was really determined to fight global warming, they'd do two things. There would be barriers to financing polluting energies, and there would be incentives to invest in renewable energies, but that's not the case. What's the government waiting for to act? Until there's not a drop of oil left to siphon out? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
And like the Honourable Member, we are committed to concerted climate action, and that's why we have the most ambitious climate plan in Canada's history, Mr. Speaker. $100 billion invested since 2015, a $9.1 billion emissions reduction plan. And Mr. Speaker, we are working to cap emissions from the oil and gas sector. We're going to be eliminating fossil fuel subsidies. We're introducing a clean electricity standard, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we are going to attain our climate goals while building a clean economy. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Repentigny. The Prime Minister announced, as part of COP15, the creation of 2 square kilometres of protected lands. That's quite the feat. Animals will be able to live peacefully, and trees will be protected. This is great for biodiversity, except we have to ensure that this won't protect or won't prevent the extraction of resources. So there are exceptions for gas, mines, and whatnot. If these protected lands can be used for anything, how are they even being protected? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Speaker, I want to reiterate that we are focusing on protecting our biodiversity and environment. We have the protection plan that I mentioned, and I'm very happy that we can talk about what we've done to protect other areas. We made a great announcement yesterday, and this is very important for reconciliation. It was good for the environment as well.
For Sturgeon River Parkland.
Mr. Speaker, just moments ago, the Assembly of First Nations, which represents Indigenous peoples across Canada, issued a declaration publicly opposing Liberal Bill C-21. This Liberal hunting gun grab is not only a threat to the livelihood of hunters, trappers, and sport shooters, it is a violation of the treaty hunting rights of all First Nations. When will this Prime Minister end his attack on law-abiding hunters and Indigenous treaty rights and stop Bill C-21?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for the question. Mr. Speaker, today Liberal members of the Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security alongside the Bloc Québécois and the NDP requested 2 urgent meetings to be held immediately. Mr. Speaker, the premise behind this is to work together. To work together with the Bloc and the NDP. Unfortunately, the Conservatives, Mr. Speaker, continue to be part of the problem versus being part of the solution. Mr. Speaker, the mission here is to get guns off the street and
ask the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to...
God, don't let us hear that again.
that I may have missed.
Come back to that.
I'll do it now. Okay. The Honourable Member for Kildonan St. Paul, does she want to withdraw the statement she made, please?
Statement, Mr. Speaker.
And apologize. Both. I'm sorry. I've got all day. I guess it's a standoff, and maybe I'll just consult my table officer so I know exactly what to do about this. I'm going to ask one more time for her to apologize, the honourable member, for Kildonan St. Paul. She's not going to apologize. Thank you. Ms. Dancho, I have to name you for disregarding the authority of the chair. Pursuant to authority granted to me by Standing Order 11, I order you withdraw from the House video conferences for the remainder of this day's sitting. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, does he want to finish off what he was saying?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I do want to take this opportunity as well to thank the Bloc, and in particular their MPs, those that are in the committee, the one that brought the motion forward. Thank you for that. The NDP, Mr. Speaker, the key here is to work together, is to ensure that we work with different organizations or different members of the House to ensure, once again, that we get those dangerous weapons off the streets. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Sturgeon River Parkland.
Mr. Speaker, consultation at this late of stage in the process is an act of bad faith by this government. It is a slap in the face to reconciliation. This government needs to go back to the drawing board, consult with First Nations, and consult with hunters across this country before coming up with any new legislation on this matter. It's black and white. The Assembly of First Nations knows it, Conservatives know it, and all other parties know it. This government was denying it for weeks, saying they weren't going after hunting rifles and shotguns, but now they're finally admitting it. They know that they were misleading this House. When will this government stop going after law-abiding hunters and sport shooters?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our government has been very clear, Mr. Speaker, that we are not targeting the guns commonly used for hunting. I applaud the members of the Bloc
Order. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, please continue.
Tell the truth this time. Sorry, Mr. Speaker, from the top or continue? Okay. I applaud the members of the Bloc and the NDP for working with us to try to come up with solutions while the Conservative Party are just looking for problems. Mr. Speaker, the committee is doing the important work that it needs to do on this legislation. I invite the honourable members from the Conservative Party to join us in finding solutions and support our emergency motion for a meeting to invite witnesses to come to committee. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for York Simcoe.
Mr. Speaker, if there's one thing our Prime Minister hates, it's diversity of opinion. He goes after anyone he doesn't agree with by insulting them, harassing them, and restricting their rights. His latest target, law-abiding firearm owners. He's banning thousands of firearms used for hunting while giving gangs and smugglers a free pass. The PM should spend more time up in a tree stand and less time standing against hunters. The Liberals have missed the mark on C-21. When will they stop targeting law-abiding hunters and farmers?
Hear, 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 hear.
The Honourable Minister for Sports.
Monsieur le Président, après ce qu'on vient d'entendre, Mr. Speaker, after what we just heard from Conservative colleagues and the insults directed at my colleagues, I don't think we have any lessons to take on that front. But when it comes to firearms, we've been clear from the beginning. We don't want to prevent hunters from hunting or Indigenous communities from practicing their traditions. And that is why we will continue to work with those who want to collaborate to protect Canadians and prevent handguns and assault weapons that have perpetrated horrific massacres, whether at the Quebec City Mosque or the Polytechnique. So I would ask everyone to act in a responsible way to protect Canadians. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Cowichan, Malahat, Langford.
Mr. Speaker, the government's proposed amendment to C-21 has become a textbook case on what not to do. This change was brought in at the 11th hour with no consultation and no testimony. It has distracted from the original purpose of the bill, and it hurts rural communities. Hunters, farmers, and Indigenous communities are outraged that some of the rifles and shotguns that they used to provide for their families could be banned. The Minister of Public Safety blindsided Canadians when he made this mess. How is he going to fix it?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I want to start by acknowledging the good work that the honourable member does on the Public Safety Committee and the perspective that he brings forward. We will not be banning any guns that are commonly used for hunting. We spent 2 hours at committee today getting very technical answers on what is included in the bill, what is included in the types of guns that are being considered under this legislation. I look forward to working with the honourable members and, in fact, all members of this House to make sure that we get this legislation right. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for Skeena Bulkley Valley.
Mr. Speaker, that answer wasn't good enough for the people of Northwest BC, and it's not good enough for the people across rural Canada. We're not going to clean up the mess the Liberals have made of this bill, and people feel hoodwinked by these last-minute amendments. Now, this was meant to be a bill about limiting handguns and protecting victims of domestic violence, but now they're going after the tools that my neighbors use for hunting, for predator control, and for backcountry safety. When is the Prime Minister going to realize the mistake he's made, fix this mess, and back up the bus?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the important role the committees have is exactly what they're doing right now. This bill, we have been very clear from the beginning. Its intention is to remove assault-style weapons from our streets and handguns that are involved in terrible tragedies. There is the opportunity, Mr. Speaker.
Tell the truth.
I'll let the Honourable Government House Leader from the top, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would say that in many different moments in time when we're dealing with contentious legislation, we have an opportunity. an opportunity to work on our differences and find solutions. And I would suggest in this instance, when we're talking about the type of weapons that are involved in terrible tragedies, in tragedies like the one unfortunately we commemorated and memorialized just a couple of days ago with Polytechnique, that our square focus must be on keeping our streets safe and to be able to look at the eyes of victims and make sure that we're removing those guns that are offending. And what we have said in no uncertain terms that those guns that are used for hunting are ones that we want to make sure are not included.
The honourable member for Fredericton.
Mr. Speaker, we know how important childcare is to families from coast to coast to coast. Families in my province of New Brunswick are already seeing the benefits of the significant investments that Canada and the province are making. I was glad to see the Minister of Families, Children and Social Development introduce legislation earlier today to enshrine the principles of a Canada-wide early learning and childcare system into federal law. Can she please update this House on this important initiative?
The Honourable Minister for Families.
Today is a historic day. This morning, I introduced Bill C-35, an act respecting early learning and childcare in Canada. And Mr. Speaker, our childcare plan is working. Fees are being reduced across the country. New spaces are being built and women are getting back to work. This legislation matters. Let me remind the House that the leader of the Conservatives boasted in 2015 that his government had proudly cancelled Liberal childcare agreements. And in the last election, every Conservative candidate ran on a promise to cancel affordable childcare for Canadians. Well, Mr. Speaker, we're not going to let that happen. On this side, we're going to support children, support families, support women, and support our economy. Thank you.
Honourable member for St. Albert, Edmonton.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberals recklessly awarded a contract to the subsidiary of a Beijing-controlled company to provide counter-espionage technology, a company that literally faces 21 espionage charges and has been blacklisted from the U.S. as a national security threat. The Liberals literally handed the keys of our national security over to Beijing. How could they be so incompetent?
The Honourable Minister for Procurement.
Mr. Speaker, and as the Prime Minister made very clear today, the Minister of Public Safety and I yesterday also share these concerns around this particular contract that the RCMP had with Sinclair Technologies, and you will have heard that that contract has been suspended. As the central purchasing agent for the Government of Canada, Public Services and Procurement will look very closely. I have instructed my officials to examine this issue. We're going to look at our procedures and our processes with the greatest intensity to ensure our security of our infrastructure.
For St. Albert, Edmonton.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday the Minister of Public Safety repeatedly claimed that vigorous security processes are in place, except that that isn't true. Government officials are on record saying that security issues were not considered when this contract was awarded, a contract that affects our national security directly. So, Mr. Speaker, when will the Liberals finally accept responsibility for this complete failure on their part to protect our national security?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
There is nothing more important than safeguarding our democracy, Mr. Speaker. The RCMP have confirmed that the contract with Sinclair Technologies has been suspended and that they're conducting further reviews to ensure that the integrity of our infrastructure is in place. Given the current geopolitical dynamics, we're taking all actions to combat foreign interference, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
The Honourable Member, l'Honourable Député de Mégantic-l'Érable.
The Honourable Member for Mégantic-l'Érable. Well, it's quite remarkable, Mr. Speaker. The Liberal government gave access to an RCMP communication system to a Beijing-held company at a time when the RCMP is actually investigating Beijing's interference in our elections. No security check, no questions about this company, even though the RCMP will be giving it secret codes at a time when the Americans have put the company on a blacklist for reasons of espionage. Instead of accepting his own responsibility, the Prime Minister is blaming others. Why is he always so feeble when it's time to stand up to the regime in China?
Minister for Public Services.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our priority is protecting the integrity of Canada's contracting system. When problems are identified, we act. I have given public servants the directive to examine contracting procedures and identify those that can be improved. Thank you. The honourable member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Mr. Speaker, we have serious problems in Canada. Based on Liberal answers, the media are the main source of the Prime Minister's information about Chinese interference, whether it's about funding a network of candidates or a Chinese communist regime-held company which gets a contract to protect RCMP communications, and yet the Prime Minister says that his intelligence specialist did not inform him. Either he's burying his head in the sand or he knows, but he's intentionally hiding information. What answer are we going to get today? The Honourable Minister of Innovation. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank my colleague for his question. As parliamentarians, Canadians, we agree that that contract should never have been signed. We all agree that national security is everyone's responsibility, and on this side of the House, Mr. Speaker, we have always taken measures to face foreign interference. My colleague will recall that a few months ago we blocked 3 transactions in order to protect critical minerals in this country. When it comes to national security, we will always be there to protect Canadians' interests. The Honourable Member for Rimouski-Nejet-Témiscouata-Lébasque. Mr. Speaker, the National Assembly of Quebec adopted a unanimous motion on academic freedoms yesterday, that the National Assembly note that promoting more representation should always occur within the consideration of equal qualifications, and that the Assembly denounce the federal government's interference. It is funding research chairs based on criteria that do not reflect Quebec's specificity. So instead of imposing its ideological agenda, why doesn't Ottawa just let Quebec manage its own research chairs? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank my colleague for his question. As he knows, research chairs throughout the country are independent from the government, but one thing is certain. We are the government that has invested the most in science, nearly $16 billion since we came to power, and I think that's the right thing to do. We all agree that the best decisions are those that are based on data and science. Thank you. The Honourable Member for Rimouski-Nejet-Témiscouata-Lébasque. Mr. Speaker, we're not talking about money. We're talking about the criteria for funding research chairs, and they no longer have anything to do with research. No one seems to care anymore about the nature of the research. It's about who the researcher is, their skin color, ethnic origin, gender, sexual orientation, or disability. Apparently, no one wants an average white man as a researcher. We need better representation. We all agree. And when qualifications are equal, it is urgent to promote underrepresented minorities. But how is excluding a category of people, how is that a policy of inclusion? The Honourable Minister of Innovation. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank my colleague for the question. We all agree about diversity and inclusion, and that's the directive that research councils received. But as my colleague knows, the criteria are developed by the various research councils. We on this side of the House, we are investing in science, we are investing in research chairs, and I think that we all agree that we want to promote diversity and inclusion, both in science and in society.
Honourable Member for Edmonton West.
Mr. Speaker, the Auditor General has again exposed the incompetence of this government. $32 billion wasted paying COVID cash to prisoners, the deceased, people living overseas, and non-eligible corporations. The Parliamentary Budget Officer has found more waste.
I'm hearing a lot of rumbling and voices, people talking to each other. If I can ask the Honourable Member for Edmonton West maybe to start over, because I'm having a hard time. There's some chatter going on.
Yes, from the top. Mr. Speaker, the Auditor General has again exposed the incompetence of this government. $32 billion wasted paying COVID cash to, low-income prisoners, low-income deceased, people living overseas, and non-eligible corporations. The Parliamentary Budget Officer has found waste of $4 billion more, with people being sent money who will actually earn more income than
the program allows them to be qualified for. Will this Liberal government end their wasteful inflationary spending so Canadians can afford to put food on their table and afford to heat their houses?
The Honourable Minister of Employment.
Speaker, this entire House approved an approach to the COVID benefits that was quick, that got money into the hands of Canadians quickly, that was based on attestation, and that ensured that post-payment there would be verification. We are going through that process now in a responsible and compassionate way. As the work is ongoing, I can assure this House that we will make sure that we follow up with everything. Thank you.
Member for Regina Capello.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister spent so much money that he actually ran out of people to borrow it from. So we had the Bank of Canada create a complex scheme to pour billions into the accounts of wealthy financial institutions. Now, as the bank raises interest rates to fight the inflation the government caused, the Bank of Canada is actually losing money. So, simple question. For the first time in Canadian history, as the Bank of Canada loses money, how much taxpayers' money will have to go to bail out the Bank of Canada?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Tourism.
Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives have heard us explain why it was important that we were there for Canadians, and if we had to do it again, we would, because Canadians needed us and we were there in their time of need. Mr. Speaker, what I don't understand is that in an hour's time we will be voting on Bill C-32, and the Conservatives have consistently voted against this bill. This bill contains an important measure that will further lower the small business tax rate for our entrepreneurs in this country. If the Conservatives wish to be consistent about their position, why are they voting against a tax cut for small businesses?
Well, member for Regina Capel.
Mr. Speaker, what the minister's not telling you is that 40% of all that new spending had nothing to do with the pandemic, and now the Auditor General has told us that over $30 billion of it was wasted. That's what's causing inflation. The government's answer is to pour more inflationary gasoline on the raging fire. It's already taking a big bite out of Canadian households. And now as interest rates rise to fight inflation, Canadians have to pay more in interest payments to the banks. But so too does the Bank of Canada. The Bank of Canada has one shareholder, the Minister of Finance. So how much money will taxpayers be on the hook for to pay off the Bank of Canada's losses?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, if the Conservatives bothered to look at the facts, they would see that we have the lowest deficit and the lowest debt among G7 countries. They would also see that the international community and investors have extraordinary confidence in the Canadian economy. Thanks to the decisions that our government has made, we still have a AAA credit rating, Mr. Speaker. I would also note that were it not for the important supports that we had put in place during the pandemic, our economy would not have rebounded as quickly and as strongly as it did, among the strongest in the world, Mr. Speaker.
L'honorable député de Bourassa.
The honourable member for Bourassa. Mr. Speaker, Haiti remains a subject of grave concern. Canada has expressed its strong support for Haiti and wishes to support Haitians in their search for peace and democracy. We need Haitian solutions to the crisis, but also support from the international community and regional partners. Under the leadership of the Minister of Foreign Affairs, what has been done to ensure that other countries follow Canada's example, to ensure that our partners commit to supporting Haitian solutions? The Honourable Minister of Foreign Affairs. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for his important question and his significant leadership on this matter. We have imposed severe sanctions on members of the elite in Haiti who are taking advantage of gang violence. And our current goal is to move forward political dialogue. That is why our UN Ambassador Bob Ray is currently in Haiti as we speak. Our objective, as always, is to support solutions by and for Haitians. The Honourable Member for Portneuf, Jacques Cartier. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This Liberal government is completely disconnected. Canadians are so worried. Everything is more expensive. Clothes, heating, housing, and food. Butter now costs $6, so some won't even be able to bake Christmas pastries. Or others are looking for sales and are buying products that are almost expired. An emeritus professor has said that 2023 will be even worse. Can the Prime Minister give some hope and a bit of breathing room to Canadians and cancel all planned tax increases? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Mr. Speaker, I still don't understand how Quebec Conservatives can be against what our government has done to face climate change. I understand that the Conservatives don't seem to care that much about climate change, but in 1 hour we will vote on Bill C-32 to lower taxes on SMEs and entrepreneurs. Why do the Conservatives systematically vote against tax decreases, including those for the middle class?
Calgary Centre.
Well, Mr. Speaker, Europe is facing an energy crisis this winter that will force people to choose between heating and eating. People are facing the trifecta of inflation, job losses, and energy shortages. To address this, European governments have reversed carbon and excise taxes. What are the Liberals doing? They're increasing Canada's carbon tax by 30%. Even Scrooge would find this unacceptable. When will the Minister of Finance realize that this crisis is not fiction and curb this tax increase on everything?
The Honourable Minister of Immigration.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to remind the honourable member that I had the pleasure of making an announcement in Nova Scotia of a new national program that's going to see $5,000 grants to help homeowners install heat pumps that will save them thousands of dollars every year on home heating costs. This is in addition to a $5,000 grant that was available through the Greener Homes Grant Program. But, Mr. Speaker, that's not all. We've got new measures including a doubling of the GST rebate, more support for low-income renters, new grants in place now to help families with the cost of sending their kids to the dentist, and much, much more. Every step of the way, our focus has been on affordability since 2015. I hope the Conservatives finally put their money where their mouth is and support us for once.
Well, member for Calgary Centre.
Well, Mr. Speaker, Canadians know a shell game when they see one of the impact of actually taxing Canadians to say they're going to give it back in all kinds of programs means we're all going to get better just by giving the government more money. According to the Parliamentary Budget Officer, an independent officer of Parliament, a 30% tax increase means an extra $700 out of the budget of Albertans. Meanwhile, European governments have provided energy tax relief to the tune of €8,000 per family. Let me ask again, why is this finance minister the only one on earth who is ignoring the obvious inflationary effects of this tax?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Health, of the Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And on this side of the House, we are focused like a laser beam on affordability, Mr. Speaker. And I hope in just a few short minutes the members opposite will vote for Bill C-32, which helps affordability. You know what else helps affordability, Mr. Speaker, is the Climate Action Rebate. It puts more money in people's pockets. 8 out of 10 families will benefit. But you know, Mr. Speaker, you know what they won't benefit from? The advice of the Leader of the Opposition to invest in cryptocurrency. And, Mr. Speaker, there's a few days left in this session. I hope the Honourable Leader of the Opposition has the opportunity to apologize. He should, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for Etobicoke Centre.
Mr. Speaker, it's been almost 10 months since Russia began its genocidal full-scale invasion of Ukraine. The Ukrainian people have mounted a remarkable counteroffensive, retaking territory, and in so doing, defending our security and democracy around the world. NATO Secretary General has said that Canada's military support, including our training of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, has been integral to Ukraine's progress on the ground. So could the Minister of National Defence share with Canadians the work that Canada is doing to train the Ukrainian Armed Forces?
Minister of National Defence.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the honourable colleague for his leadership on this issue. Since 2015, under Operation Unifier, the Canadian Armed Forces have trained more than 34,000 Ukrainian military personnel. We are training them in England. We are training Ukrainian engineers in Poland. And, Mr. Speaker, why? Because their sovereignty, their stability, and their security is global security as well, Mr. Speaker. And we are there in the short and the long term until Ukraine wins this war.
The honourable member for Vancouver East.
Yesterday, the Bank of Canada's interest rate hike was hiked yet again. Interest rates have already fueled the high cost of rent. This will just make it worse. Canadians are now facing a nearly 12% rent hike. In Vancouver, a one-bedroom apartment costs over $2,576, more than a 17% increase from last year. The NDP has always said the $500 housing benefit is not enough. Will this government help renters by expanding and extending the housing benefit?
The Honourable Minister of Housing.
Mr. Speaker, unfortunately, the honourable colleague has not stated all the facts. The fact of the matter is we're the government that introduced the Canada Housing Benefit, which is already delivering an average of $2,500 to vulnerable renters across the country, and it's active in all 10 provinces and 3 territories. So the $500 top-up that the honourable member is mentioning is on top of that $2,500 average payment. On top of that, we are moving ahead with the Rapid Housing Initiative, the National Housing Co-Investment Fund, and more supports for vulnerable renters, Mr. Speaker.
Absolutely. Honourable Member for Spadina, Fort York.
Mr. Speaker, on December 6, I again questioned the government on the very serious matter of foreign interference. The government revealed that their strategy is to observe and report. Seriously? To observe and report, Mr. Speaker? To whom? To the Brain Trust, who approved Chinese communications equipment for the RCMP? There are more protests in China and Iran against those regimes than action from this government. Mr. Speaker, mall cops observe and report. Why is this government failing to protect Canadians and stand up for Canada?
The Honourable Minister, the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
There's nothing more important to us than safeguarding our democracy. And that's why, as a government, we're taking action to combat foreign interference. We begin with our national security agents. They conduct investigations and use all tools at their disposal. It includes the significant work that's being done to shore up Canada's institutions and critical infrastructure. And finally, Mr. Speaker, it involves longer-term solutions, which is why we're exploring changes to legislation to strengthen Canada's defences. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I'm afraid that's all the time we have to today. We have a couple of points of order. L'honorable député de Drummond.
The honourable member for Drummond.